Hi, my name is Mitch Boyer. I run a print shop called Nice Art Prints, and in this video, we're going to talk about Blackpoint compensation, what it is, and when to use it. I don't know why I'm using my thumbs to illustrate this. Let's go. The image for this video was sent in by Joe Warner. Thank you, Joe. He sent in this really beautiful image of his wife up in Napa Valley. I think it's really cool, and it's perfect for talking about Blackpoint compensation because if you look at it here, we're looking at the histogram and there's a lot of information on the left side. That means it's a low-key image. There's a bunch of information in the dark tones. Okay, wait, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Before we go any further, check out Joe's Instagram. It's in the description. Follow him. While you're there, please like and subscribe. It helps to promote this channel to more people who are interested in or love printing or hate printing but want to learn to love it, or who are just stuck inside their homes like we all are right now. Cool. Blackpoint compensation. What is it? Let's start with that. This is a Blackpoint chart. This might be a little bit difficult to see on the video, especially since you're watching a compressed YouTube video. I'll do my best to kind of brighten everything up while I'm doing the color correct. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. I will also link to the Photoshop file that I used to make this. I'm not going to make a whole video on making this chart, but the layered file is there so you can dig into it and you can see how I made it. Anyways, what is this? What does it do? This chart is a tool for seeing at what point you lose all detail in an image. So this big rectangle here, that's all printed at the darkest black that my printer can print on this paper. It's going to be really hard to see on this top row, but there are 6 squares and then there are another 6 on this bottom row. You can probably see this one really easily. So it's starting at pure black and then goes up to 1, then 2, then 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 24, and 48. So these numbers represent the black point which all these squares are printed at. We're just looking for the first point at which you can see detail. I'm looking at this and I can see detail at 48. I can also see it at 24. If I turn on the flashlight, I can see it pretty easily at 16, at 14, and 12. I can even see it just barely. I can make it out on 10. I can see the outline of the square. But when I go here to 8, I really struggled to see any detail. Now, I have shown this chart to a bunch of people, and a few people can see detail here at 8. Nobody's ever been able to see detail here at 6. If you really wanted to test it out, what you could do is you could use a spectrometer, and you can measure the density of the ink here at 8 or here at 6, and compare that to this background black and see if there's any difference or if it's the same. If it's the same, it means that there's no detail there, so you've lost all of the information at that point. Okay, so let's say you take an image, right? And we're just gonna make a histogram here. Let's say this is your histogram. It's a beautiful histogram. So as you can see on this histogram, here on the left side, there's a bunch of information. Now, what happens if your paper is able to print from here, but only until here is 8. So everything below this point is just gonna get crushed. You'll lose all of that information. With Blackpoint compensation, what we do is we take this histogram, so we wanna move the whole histogram over to the right so that now it looks more like this. And see, now there's no information here below that point. Now the whole image fits the dynamic range, fits inside the paper. So basically, going back to this, so we took everything at 0 and we shifted it up to 8 and 1, all the way up to 10, 2 to 12, and so on. We pushed the whole thing brighter. That's basically Blackpoint compensation. Let me show you the same thing inside of Photoshop. Okay, so here I am in Photoshop. This is the image that Joe sent us. I made a layer. It's just a levels layer called Blackpoint compensation. And here you can see in levels, it has shown us the histogram. This image is very heavy to the left because it's a low-key image. It's not a very bright image. Most of it is in shadow. And that's part of the mood of the image. We don't want to change that, but we know from what I just showed you, that's not going to print super well. So when I see an image like this, the first thing I do is I want to see at what point does detail start showing up in the image. So see this little triangle here on the left side? If I hold down Option and click on that triangle, the whole image goes white. It's showing us what information is at this point, 0. And then if we drag it to the right, it's going to show us what information is at that point and to the left of it. So you can see this little box below that's going up from 0, and then right now it's at 31. What's displaying is all of the information that is at 31 or below. So you can see there's a lot of information. Let's drag it down and see, when do we start seeing information? So if I go up to, if I go up to 1, down there at the bottom, there's a little bit of information in her jacket. If I go up to 3, there's a lot more information. Looks like we have some information in her jacket and in the grass to her left and right. And then if I go up to 8, look at all that information. So if you remember from our Blackpoint compensation chart, we saw that at 8, anything below that we're gonna lose. So if I were to print this image without doing any Blackpoint compensation, it would look like this. All of that information is just destroyed. I made a mask so you can see. I mean, that's a lot of information to lose in an image, especially for a low-key image where so much detail is in that like far left side of the histogram. Obviously, we don't want to lose that. So how do we do a Blackpoint compensation? Well, there are 3 ways. 1, you don't. You just don't do any Blackpoint compensation. 2, you let the computer do it automatically for you. And then 3, if you're a control freak like me, you do it manually. I'm going to show you all 3. I just contradicted myself because I said we've established that this image needs Blackpoint compensation, but not every image does. Let's look at this one. This might look familiar. This was in a video from a couple weeks ago, sent in by Juliet Warren. It's this beautiful image taken in Yosemite. And if I look at the histogram here, you can see on the left side, the whole histogram's actually shifted forward already. There's actually not a lot of deep blacks going on in this image. So here we are in the levels. If I do the same trick, this far left arrow, I hold down Option and click on it and drag it to see where information starts. We start getting a little bit of information around like 6 or 7, but we don't get any substantial information until way up here, almost at 30. So printing this image on a matte paper that's upside down, there wasn't detail showing up until 6 or 7, but it wasn't even a lot of detail. So I know I'm going to maintain most of the detail, pretty much all of it, just by printing it without Blackpoint compensation. So don't just apply Blackpoint compensation to every single image. Before you print, just do a quick test, open up levels, see where the information starts. You might not need it. The second option is to let the computer do it. I'm moving from Photoshop now to Canon Professional Print and Layout. It's a plugin that comes when you buy one of the any of the Image Prograph series, you can get this program with it. And I think some of the other ones, just like the Pixma printers, they may come with it. Don't hold me to that, but it's a possibility. Okay, so Professional Print and Layout, I'm here. We've talked about this before in other videos. You can watch my last video on calibrating, and I go through a little more detail on how to use this program there. We're just worried about one little section. On the right side under General Settings, I'm going to scroll down to Color Management. And you can see for this particular print, I've got the ICC profile loaded up for, I had Baryta loaded up. That's a no-no. I'm going to have the Photorag matte paper ICC profile loaded up. Okay, so I have the correct ICC profile. And then over here on the bottom, there's this little check mark. You want to make sure you have soft proofing on. Soft proofing is going to attempt to illustrate on your monitor what the final print is going to look like. Soft proofing is only really effective when you've dialed in your monitor and calibrated. I don't do all this work on my laptop when I'm working on a print for a client. I do it on my calibrated monitor, which I can see and I'm looking at, but you cannot see. Just make sure you calibrate your monitor and then make sure soft proofing is checked on. It's very important. Okay, then back over here on the right under color management, we have ICC profile and then the printer profile. and then rendering intent. Under rendering intent, there's another check box. Use Blackpoint compensation. If you click it on and look at the image on the left, you can see it's lifted the blacks in the image. So let's uncheck it again. You can see everything got a little bit darker, and then check it again, everything's a little bit brighter. This program is just shifting the histogram over to the right. It's looking at the ICC profile for the paper and it's saying like, okay, I know there's no information here, so I'm just gonna push everything up brighter. And that's what it does. This little checkbox works 80% of the time. If you have an image that's just a pretty normal exposure, most of the weight is in the middle, this is gonna do everything you need to do. But sometimes you have an image like this, where it's a low-key image, and shifting it up might shift it further than you want it. Okay, so again, you're viewing this through a compressed YouTube video. It's not the most ideal way to look at details, but you know, it's what we have right now. So this is the original, and this is auto Blackpoint compensation. It's gonna be kind of difficult for you to see here. I'll try to highlight it with this, and maybe that will help. But you may be able to see we lose all detail down here in the blacks. And over here, it's been lifted up just a tad so that you can see a little more detail in there. It's not a perfect scenario for viewing all these. I wish you could be here and see them with me in person. Because again, we're looking at like very minute changes and you really have to pay attention. But you may be able to notice, as I do, if you look here in the midtones and even in the hair, those have been lifted up also. And so this image is actually entirely brighter than the original images. And since it's a low-key image, I really don't want to be messing around with that brightness. So this is an image where it's time to be a control freak and just really dial it in. So let's do that right now. All right, so we're back inside of Photoshop now. I'm going to show you what the program just did to lift the Blackpoint compensation, and then I'm going to show you how to customize it and refine it so that it's really just affecting only the darkest parts of the image. Blackpoint compensation. We are going back up here to the levels. Now, we use this to test and see where the details are. You can see it was up at 8. Pull that back down to 0. We don't want to adjust the input levels. That's this top part here, where the histogram is. This is the input. Down here, you can see we have the output levels. So this is what the levels adjustment layer is receiving, the input, and then this is what it's going to output. So you can see we have a scale here from 0 to 255. If I move this black here, you can see it lifts it up. And this is what Blackpoint compensation is doing inside of that program. It's taking this little slider and it's moving it up. So let's say it moves it up to 10. Let's watch just on the histogram. So you can see on the histogram over here, if I turn it off, that's before and that's after. It literally just shifts the whole histogram to the right. Let me show you a few little issues that occur when all you're doing is just moving it to the right. In order to clearly illustrate this, I'm going to exaggerate it because again, I'm a broken record. This is a compressed video. So let's say we wanted our Blackpoint compensation for whatever reason to be up here at 57. Okay, if I take that, I'm just going to make a copy of it. So if we toggle between the two, you can see the original and the new one. Take a look at the saturation of the image. This is washed out. So not only is the luminosity of this image washed out, but also the saturation of the image is washed out. So what we want to do is let's go back to this levels layer, and you can see the blend mode here is set to normal. That's just going to affect everything. If we go down here and select luminosity, then this adjustment layer is only going to affect the luminosity of the image. That means the saturation will stay intact and the luminosity will be lifted. Now if we compare it, only luminosity, and this is the full thing, you can see how desaturated it's become. But if we go from this to the original image, you can see that the saturation has remained, but the Blackpoint has been lifted. Now that's an exaggeration. You would never actually lift it up this much, but we've got one other problem. If I toggle this on and off again, watch the histogram. Obviously, down here on the left, everything's getting lifted up. That makes sense. But if you look right here, this little peak is also shifting. The whole image is getting changed. We want to dial it in so that that doesn't happen. We really only want to affect the blacks and the shadows of the image. Now, there are a lot of ways you could do this. You could use a mask and select only that area, or you could use my favorite tool in the world, curves. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, so this curves tool is going to help us dial in the Blackpoint compensation so it's just right. Let's talk about the curves tool really quick. If you look here, the vertical axis is actually your output levels. So if we go back to the levels here, this has the same effect as this. They're the same. That means the horizontal axis is, you guessed it, your input levels. So if I just lift this up, and you can see on the output, we can even type it in just like we did on levels. We can put it up at 10. I'm going to refine this a little bit because I know we don't need it right at 10. I'm going back to levels just to use this to see what point we start seeing detail. Holding down Option, clicking. All right, so we're getting detail at 1. I'm getting a scaling issue. That's what that was. Okay, here we go. So detail starts at 1 or 2. 2 is where the real detail starts. So what I want, instead of detail starting at 2, I want it to start at 8. But because I know that it's 2, I take 8 minus 2 and I get 6. So if I lift this up on the curves, if I lift output up by 6, in theory, we should be right on. Let's check it out. So I'm going to make a new levels to check. This new levels is on top. And now if I click here, hold down Option, you can see 0, we're good. There's no information. 7, we start getting information. And then at 8, we get the information. Does that make sense? Let me go through that one more time. Okay. I'm going to rename this first levels review. I turn this levels adjustment layer on. All I'm doing here is I'm reviewing the image and I'm going to see when does detail start. So I hold down Option, I click. I see there's a little detail at 1. I don't care so much about that detail. There's a lot of detail at 2. So in my mind, I'm making a mental note. 2 is where the detail starts. On this little chart that I printed off, I know that detail starts here at 8 and 6 is no detail. So if this image detail starts at 2, I need to lift the image up so that 2 is now 8. Are you following with me? So all you got to do is some really easy math. Take 8 minus 2 and you get 6. 6 is going to be the new 0. So all it is we're moving 0 up to 6. I'm turning review off again. Now we're going up to the curves layer. Inside this curves layer, I am lifting the output level up to 6. So again, we just moved 0 up to 6. So that means detail should now start at 8. Let's test that. So now I'm on this top levels layer. I'm going to rename this review 2. Fingers crossed, if this all works, that detail should start at 8 instead of 2. So I hold down Option, I click, we move up, there should be, so we're at 4, 6. So now we should see a little detail at 7, just like we saw a little detail at 1 before. Oops, spoiler. You can see there's a little detail, and then a lot of detail should start at 8. So we've effectively moved that detail from 2 up to 8. You following me so far? Okay, so I'm going to delete the review layers now because we don't need it. So in this curves layer, if I turn it off and you watch the histogram, you'll see the histogram goes back to the left, and if I turn it on, it goes back to the right. However, we have the same problem we had with the levels. If I turn it off and on, you can see not only is the left side of the histogram being adjusted, so is the right side, and we don't want that. So how do we fix it? This is the beauty of where curves comes in. So with levels, you get one point that you can adjust and kind of refine things, the midpoint. But with curves, all along this line, you can add as many points as you want. Now, if you're familiar with curves, you know that you can drag these points around and you can really manipulate the image in a bunch of different ways. I'm gonna delete all of those. All I wanna do is I wanna lock in these higher values in the histogram. So I'm gonna go at the midpoint right here and I'm gonna click right in the middle. Now you wanna make sure your input and output number are exactly the same because that will guarantee that you're right on this line. You'll notice if I pull it down, these numbers are different, 126, 117. If I just change 117 to 126, we're right on the midpoint. So now when I toggle on and off, you can see the histogram doesn't move quite as much. It's really only moving the lower left part of the histogram. If you really want to kind of dial it in, you can add more points. So I could add a point up here. So just 192, 192, all right? So you can see the histogram pretty much holds still here on the left while you're lifting it up. Now you can add as many points as you want in here. You could really kind of like limit it only to the blacks, but this is where you get into dangerous territory. You don't want to change the intent of the image or start manipulating it too much. You just want to adjust enough so that you get the best possible print. So I think these 2 points are more than enough. And when I'm looking at this, I noticed one more thing. I forgot to change the blend mode to luminosity. There you have it. That is how I manually adjust Blackpoint. There are other ways you could do it. You could stick with the levels and kind of adjust that midpoint and try to refine it. You could also create masks, but this is a very simple, easy, non-destructive way to adjust the Blackpoint. That is pretty much it. So from here, I just make a flattened version of the file, and then I open up Canon's Professional Print and Layout right out of Photoshop. This will load up. And then the last thing is that when I'm down here, I make sure that Use Blackpoint Compensation is off because I just adjusted in Photoshop. I don't want to lift it up even more and ruin all that hard work that I just did. But that's pretty much it. It's really not too difficult. Let's look at the files. I've printed them off already. Here is the original file, and here's the one with manual Blackpoint compensation. So you should be able to see that we lost a lot of information down here in the blacks, and now we have a lot of information that has returned, but we've done it without really ruining the midtones by lifting them up too much and ruining Joe's original interpretation of this image. Thanks, Joe. That's Blackpoint compensation. If you have questions, put them down in the comments. If you have a video that you would like me to make, please also put that in the comments. Thank you to all of you that have been submitting images. I am going to put a hold on image submissions for the time being. So I'm no longer accepting image submissions. I just have too many that I need to work through and make videos of first. Once I work through all of those, I will open up for submissions again. But again, right now, no more submissions. My print shop is open if you would like to buy a print. I do not expect that. If you know somebody who might be interested in these videos, please share them. Invite them to like and subscribe. It really helps promote the channel. We just got past 1,000 followers, which is mind-blowing to me that there's even 1,000 people that want to talk about printing, but here we are. Anyway, yeah, this was a fun one. My name is Mitch. This is Nice Art Prints. I'll see you in the next one.